Pointfire. This year I was hoping to entice you with a booth, games, prizes, giveaways. Okay, no, I have to settle for 60 seconds here to show you our very cool new translation tool for the brand new SharePoint multilingual publishing feature. The new feature is available for certain modern pages on Communications site. Out of the box, if you click on Translation, it opens up a translation panel. From there, you can create a copy of the page. It doesn't actually translate it. Let's create one for French, and then let's go view that page. The page is still in English. Someone on your staff has to translate it and to publish it. Let's try that again, but this time I've activated Pointfire Translation Automation. So once again, let's create one for French, and then let's view that page. By the time we view it, Pointfire has already translated for your approval. Go to try.pointfire.com for a free trial or contact us for a demo.
Okay, all right, now we're ready to start. Okay, before we begin, hope everybody can hear me, see me. Give me a thumbs up in the channel, just to let me know that you're out there and alive. So I'm monitoring I'll be monitoring the chat on my left side, and we'll be presenting over here. So let's get started. All right, before we begin, just want to give a quick shout out to the Children's First Fund. There's a link here for donations. This event's free for everybody. If you find any value in what any of these presentations or topics that are being discussed, if you could do anything, $5, $10, it goes a long way to help out raising money for the Chicago Public Schools. Also, thanks to our sponsors. We have a number of wonderful sponsors here, which makes these events possible, helps out with prizes at the end, and this is another virtual event. Hopefully looking forward to seeing everybody soon in person. So again, I'll have this at the end, but please scan this QR code or go to the feedback link and give us feedback on our sessions and let us know how we can improve or how the conference can improve. All right, so you're all here for building Microsoft Teams provisioning process using Power Apps and Power Automate. And I will be giving you the presentation, and I'll just tell you a little bit about me. So who am I? Why am I giving this presentation? My name's Thomas Daly. I'm a collaboration director at Soho Dragon, and that's New York City. I'm actually based in New Jersey. I've been here my whole life, pretty much. I am a Microsoft 365 developer, so I've been working with SharePoint ever since, for like 15 years now. So ever since Portal Server 2003, I've been doing development and building solutions and working with customers and clients. I've been a consultant the whole time, so I've seen a lot of things during that time period. I'm also an Office Apps and Services MVP. So again, that's based on some of my community contributions online, GitHub, message forums, events, speaking, that kind of stuff. I co-run the New Jersey SharePoint user group here in New Jersey, which we're doing all online events. So you can check out the link there. My slides will be available at the end. I also run SharePoint Saturday in New York City, which is a large event on the East Coast there in New York. It's fantastic, but we haven't had one because we were all locked down. So we're looking forward to that, hopefully next year. I also organize a number of different things like Azure boot camps and M365 developer boot camps. They're all online currently, and we do those once a year. So those, if you're getting started with development, those are good to check out. And all these things I announce on my blog. So if you follow me on Twitter, you'll see that, or you follow the New Jersey user group. We post all the events that we're holding online there. Again, blogging. I have some GitHub projects, all related to SharePoint development or tips and tricks. This actual presentation is on my blog right now, so it's in video format, so you can see the recording of this, and it'll go into a lot more detail than we'll cover in this hour. So a little bit before we start, this is going to be intended for 200 plus. So we're going to talk about a lot of simple things with Power Automate and Power Apps, and then we're going to stretch a little bit where we're going to talk about Azure Active Directory, and I'll show you that in the next slide. and Microsoft Graph. So feel free to ask questions anytime. If you raise your hand, I can unmute you and you can ask it live, and that's it, and we'll go from there. So again, all my slides are online and on my blog, and I'll post the link at the end of the session. Okay, so let's get started. This is what we're going to talk about. We're going to do a little introduction, talk about SharePoint's role in this process, Power Automate's role, talk about Azure Active Directory and why do we need that, why are we using MS Graph, and lastly, we will build a Power App that will collect some information for us. Why do we want to provision teams? This is the #1 question. Like, why would you want to do this? #1 is self-service. So you don't necessarily have to go in there and create the teams manually. Someone does, you don't just get it through email. So somebody can just submit a request, and then a process will take place, and then the team will be provisioned. Right? That's easy as it sounds. Right? Automatically, it can do things like automatically add members to your team, automatically add administrators to your team. Pretty much whatever you need to do, you can build out this process to do it. What we're going to cover is a pretty basic, no frills process of creating a team. Another major point here is governance of the MS Teams creation process. So approval, you can build that in with Flow. Teams review, so emailing admins, having them go in, look at the information, and either approving or denying the process. The last thing is to automate and standardize team setup. So when your teams are created, maybe you want to create a bunch of teams with the same folder structure over and over and over again. You can do that with this process. Maybe you want to create a team with a SharePoint site and you want to do some automation on the SharePoint site. You can do that with this process, right? So kind of extending the basics of the flow and building out some extra functionality using Azure Functions, PowerShell, PnP. Those are a little bit more advanced topics, but this will at least get you started with that. So again, why provision teams? We've seen in the past SharePoint Sprawl, where SharePoint was released in the organization, people started creating these random team sites, or they weren't named correctly. They just started kind of to grow out of control. There weren't like quotas in place or governance for certain who should get a team, who should get a SharePoint site, that kind of stuff. So now it's the same story with Microsoft Teams. Everybody in my organization, when we first rolled it out, everybody wanted a team. There were teams all over the place. Now we're starting to like, okay, take a look at it. We tightened everything up, but we also see this with customers and clients too as well. So it just gets a little out of control. Anybody can create teams, users can create teams. We shut all that stuff down and we put in one of these processes to allow only certain teams if they meet a criteria. Right. So in the past, we would make, as a consultant, I've always had to build, like, at least a couple times a year, build a SharePoint provisioning process, creating a SharePoint site based off of some information that somebody submitted via a form or some sort of template. And we would then go out and automate the process of creating SharePoint sites, whether it's department sites, and every department site would look the same. You would apply the branding, you would put the web parts on, that kind of stuff. So it's kind of the same thing in the Teams world. And I have a real world example where we built a project management portal. So it's for another consulting company where they have a number of client sites. So they want all the client projects to have teams associated with it so they can share information, they can add customers to the teams, and they can collaborate quicker there. And then it's a one-stop shop, so they can have the folder there in the SharePoint folder, so they can store the documents, they can communicate. So this is the real world scenario. But on the SharePoint side, they also want to be able to find the teams. So finding the teams, we use the SharePoint portal and a web part to help them search. And I'll show you an example of this in the next slide. Right, so this is a real world example of this project hub. Again, it's like a no frills, out of the box SharePoint site, but they have a new button which would launch our Power App. It would go and create teams through the provisioning process. And then once it was completed, it would then add it to this project list. There's a field here called provisioning, which you can't see because it's filtered out. But once it was finished, the person that requested the team would get an email saying that their team is now active. They could possibly get a Teams message if you wanted to do that as well. And it will get added to the site. So they can, now what you're seeing here are the PNP modern SharePoint search parts. This is a great search web part, compilation of web parts that you assemble, and you can replicate basically search functionality against whatever you want. You have to build it out. But I highly recommend that if you're looking for some search web parts. These are more powerful than the SharePoint out-of-the-box search center, I believe, because you can customize the templates and there's filtering. So it's a very good project to take a look at if you haven't heard about that. So on here, you can search for the projects. It'll filter down, and then it'll provide you with whatever metadata fields that you want to do. So there's a little nice feature for them when they're building out their team projects. All right, so let's go into the architecture, how this thing is going to be set up. So we have our users. Our users are going to hit SharePoint. They're going to go to a SharePoint site, and they're going to fill out a list item. The list is going to kick off a Power Automate flow. The Power Automate flow will then generate a Microsoft team. After the team is created, it will then go to Microsoft Graph to get the URL of the team, because when the teams are created, it just gives you back a GUID, which is a unique identifier for the team. We now need to look that up against Microsoft Graph, and then this will authenticate with Azure AD. Can we access this information? Yes. Send it back to our Power Automate, and our Power Automate will put this information back on the SharePoint list. And the last part of this process, we're going to cover up that list, and we're going to build a Power App so that the users don't interact with the list directly, because there's things on this list that the users really shouldn't see. And that would have been, we'd have to customize the list. Power Apps is the way that we would customize the list. All right, so a little bit more about like the roles of SharePoint and Power Apps. So SharePoint's going to be used essentially as the data store to hold the items in the list, right? So the user will fill out that form. The form will trigger a flow. We're customizing the SharePoint list with the Power App. Power Apps are great because they allow you to create fancier forms. There's more you can do in the Power App. Prior to Power App, you would have to open the form in Designer and hack it up, or create some sort of app that interacts with the SharePoint list. So the way that we're doing that now is with Power Apps. Power Apps can easily just hide and show the information we don't want and prevent the users from playing with those fields or entering those fields. And the other thing I would add about the Power App is that we'll create 3 versions of the Power App. So we'll have one for new, which will be the one that the users interact with. We'll have one for edit and view, which those would stay pretty much stock, and allow the admins to go actually see the list and interact with it with all the fields and not just the hidden fields. All right, so what does Power Automate do? So this is the workflow engine that's going to be used to create our teams, right? So there's some actions in Power Automate that can automatically create teams for you. And these are beta actions, but they're still we're still going to use them in this example to set up this process. It's going to handle updates back to our SharePoint list. So like I said earlier, when we get the GUID of the team, we'll look up information. We'll also write back that the team was provisioned so that it doesn't run again. What else can it do? It could contact the requester when the team's provisioned. You can do that with email. You can do that with a chat message, and it's flexible, and it's easy to update. So if you want to add something later, you can go in, you can add it. I talked about that advanced stuff with PowerShell PNP. Normally in our flow, when it gets to the end and it creates the team, or sometimes we create the team with the PowerShell, we will then run something in Azure to manipulate the SharePoint site. So once the site's created, we would kick off an Azure function, and that would use PowerShell PNP to communicate with SharePoint. So again, using Azure Active Directory, we're going to take that MS Teams ID, generate the site URL. We have to create an Azure Active Directory app registration. This allows us to create client secret and client ID, which we would plug into our flow, which would, when it provides that information, it would authorize it to get the URL, the information that we're looking for, which is this site URL. And the last one is, yeah, this is going to be, information is going to be added to our Power Automate flow. I just said that. So most of this session is demo, so it is about 40 minutes of demo. We'll squeeze as much in as we can, and we'll go from there. So let me just readjust here. We'll shift a little gears. All right, so I'm going to create this live. I normally don't like to create it live because so many things can happen. So what we have here is my SharePoint site. I have a blank SharePoint site. There's nothing on it right now. I'm going to go into the site contents. And in here, I'm going to create a new list, a blank list, and I'm going to call this projects. Create that list, and let's see. So I do have a cheat sheet to help me get through this because sometimes you just make silly typos when you're doing it live. Okay, so we're going to add a column. Now we want to add a hyperlink column. We want to capture the site URL, and this is based more for the portal, so that we can search, we can find this information, we can see when we can click on it, and the users can go to it if we're building out the portal. This isn't totally necessary if you weren't gonna have users come here and interact with it. So I'm going to create that site URL. I'm going to create a new field for a person. I'm going to say admins, and I'm going to do, oh, it's already set to that. I'm not going to do groups because Teams don't allow you to put the groups in there. So we want to allow multiple. And then we'll do another column. Oops. Let's do another column here for person. We'll say members. And we will click on allow multiple. We'll do some maintenance columns here. So yes, no, active. Now this again would be something I would use to filter if it's an active project. You could go in when the project's over and disable it. It would disappear from the UI, from the display. So for this one, I'm going to default it to yes. And then let's see, one more yes and no. We'll say provisioned. And this one we will default to no. So by default, when I create a new item, right, I can see all this stuff. I can type all this stuff in. Something is not right here. We're missing a field. Let me refresh. There we go. Yeah, so we have now more fields, so I can type stuff in, put in my admins, and again provision. But we wouldn't normally want people to see this, the users, once we get to that part. So again, we're just setting up our structure here. The next thing we need to do is now create a flow. So I will go to Power Automate, and we will create a flow, but I always like to go to see my flows first. And I'm going to copy this URL because I'll know I'm going to need that in a second. I'm not going to jump back and forth. So okay, inside my flows, we'll create a new automated cloud flow, and we'll call this M365 Chicago. I already have one in there from yesterday. Just make sure everything works, and we're going to do this when an item is created. All right, so first step, we're going to put in our site, and to do that, since we just created it, it probably won't show up. Oh, it actually showed up here. So I can click it, or you can do custom value and put in the URL, and then it will detect our projects list. There's nothing in there that I need, so we can go to the next step. Next step. So I mentioned earlier about these controls or these actions here. So if you put in teams, you can see a list of the teams actions here. These are all preview. They've been preview for a while, but they still create teams. They still work. They're just not final in their final state. So we're going to take advantage of these for this demo, and we're going to do create a team. And now we need to give the team a name. So we're going to use some of These are some of the properties from the list. So we'll use the title of the list item. And then for the description, since we didn't add a description field, we'll just use the title as well for the description. And you can choose if you want to have these public or private, but for this demo, we'll leave them public. Now, in the next step, what we want to do in the next step, since we have all this, we want to add our admins and our members to the team. So we'll type in teams again, and we'll add a member to the team. We need to give it the team's URL, which should be generated in this last step. So let's go here and say, enter a custom value. This is the team's ID from the previous step. So we'll put that in. Now we need to put in the AAID for the users, and we're going to have multiple users, multiple admins. So what we want is the admin's email. Now, since this is a multi-select field, it automatically changed it to a loop, like apply to each. Right, so you need to do something here. You might want to check if there's anything in there before you set this field, so it doesn't break. But this is going to be the quick and dirty version. So we want to make these people, should the newly added user be an owner? Since these are admins, we're going to say yes, we want these to be owners. And we'll add another step. We'll say teams, and we're going to add a member to a team. And we'll just do another custom value. So this here, we're going to pick on members email. And should they be an owner, we're going to say no. All right. Next step now we've already essentially created the team in this flow process. What we want to do at the end, we want to update our SharePoint item. So we'll say update item. We'll update our SharePoint item. And we'll pick our site, pick our list. And now we need the ID of the SharePoint item, which comes in from step 1. So we'll just look for ID. We need the title, which we'll just use the same title. We're not changing anything. And now we have a bunch of fields here. So what we want to do is we want to say provisioned. We want to say it's provisioned now. And then lastly, what we'll do is we'll just write, we don't have the site title, we'll just write the team's ID to this site URL. Actually, we can't do that. So let's just leave that blank for now. I'm just going to do one more step. So we'll send an email. And in this step, we will send it to the creator. So let's see, created by email, whoever created it. And we'll put in your team was provisioned. Your team was provisioned. You're awesome. Okay. We could CC the admin. We can do, sending an email. We could do whatever we want here. So we'll save this. And that's it. So let's wait for it to save. We'll just do a quick test to verify everything's working. So I clicked on test here, and I will click on manual, and I will go over to my list, and let's hope that I can create one since I used. So all we really need here is the title. That's the only thing required, but let's just check that these fields work. So in the owners, I'll add admin, and I do have like a visitor account here, visitor 1, visitor 2. And we'll leave these blank for now. This is just a test. Ensure that our flow is working, everything's lined up. We'll just give it a few seconds. Okay, so now it's going. All right, and it does take a couple seconds for the team to be created. Right, so the team was created. You can see some of the inputs and the outputs. The output was our GUID here of the new team. And we're going here and we are doing a couple things. So let me get to my Outlook so we can see that the email went through. Right, your team was provisioned. That was from the other day, so that's not good. Okay, let's go. Oh, you know what? This might be, the time zone might be off on my tenant So also we'll check one more thing. We'll go to the Teams Admin Center. I'm just looking for that link if I had it open. So we'll go here, open up our Admin Center. Go to Teams. All right, Manage Teams. And then we should see ZA1. Right, so there you go. And we can see there's 3 members of this team. So let's just open it up. So we have the owner and then we have the 2 visitors. So it's successfully completed and we verified it and we know now it's working. Right, so I'm assuming this is the email. It's from today, it's just the wrong time. I think it's PST, so that would make sense. It's going to be not the right time. All right, so that's step 1. That's the basics of provisioning a team. It's very easy. You know, we made it in a couple minutes. Now we're going to enhance it. And if there's any questions, feel free to ask any questions in the chat. We'll move on to the next thing of enhancing this team. So, and building out the rest of the process. So what I essentially want to do now is get the URL of the team. Now, again, I want that because I want to put that back in the list item so that it's usable to people that are looking for the site through SharePoint. There's no other reason why I would want to do that. If this is just like a back-end process, you don't need to expose it. But maybe you want to send the user, hey, here's your team, here's the URL to the SharePoint site, or here's your URL to something. I need the SharePoint URL, so I'm going to go ahead and get that. So next thing I need to do, I mentioned Azure Active Directory, so I'll have to go into, well, before I go into that, let's click on Edit, and I'll show you why we need to go in there. So before we update SharePoint item, we want to do one more thing. We're going to add an action. This is going to be a premium connector, premium operation here. So we need to, premium action, I keep calling them connectors. We need to make an HTTP request, and that's going to go, this is where we stretch above 200 level. So an HTTP request, we're going to ask Graph for some information. Now, we need a lot of different things here, which might seem a little scary, but it's not. So we need to call Graph, so we need the endpoint URL of Graph. And you could do that. You can find that information out using Graph Explorer. So we just say Microsoft Graph Explorer. And this is like a little sandbox here of the things that you can do in Graph. So if I want to get my mail, but you have Teams beta here. You got some Microsoft Teams here. So if I wanted to know my teams, I click this, and it gives you the endpoint of what you need to do. If you wanted to create a team, which is I believe these are going to be in the beta. That's why it's still a preview. Yeah, create a channel, but we want to create a team. It's not listed here. Just because it's not listed here doesn't mean you can't use it. These are just samples. So you can go to the API references and find all of them that are there. So this is how you find out, okay, here's my team. I'm going to pump in the GUID, and then you can see what apps are installed in the team. There's a lot of stuff you can do, but you need to get the URL of where you need to go, and then you need to authenticate. So we're going to use Active Directory authentication since we're in Microsoft land. And we're going to fill out this information now. We need to generate this information in Azure Active Directory. So let's go and do that now. So in Azure Active Directory, I'm going to go to Enterprise Apps. Okay, I see a question come in. Yeah, I'll get to that in 1 second. I just don't want to lose my train of thought. So I'll create a new oops, I went to the wrong thing. App registration. So you want to do app registration. So here we'll make an app registration. We'll say M365 Chicago 1 because I have one. Everything else can be left blank. This takes a few seconds to build. Now we need to capture some information. We need the object ID. Not the object ID, I'm sorry. We need the application ID. So I'll copy that. And that's going to basically be our client ID. We need to get our tenant ID. We're going to need this, so I'll copy this. We need to generate a secret. So let's go to the secrets, and we'll click on New Secret and again, you can set this for custom length. We're just doing testing. I need the value of the secret, so I'm going to copy this, pasting that into another window so I can use that later. And then we need to grant it permissions saying what it can do. So we're going to add a permission. It's a graph permission. We're going to say it's an application. And then we'll scroll down. Since teams are considered groups, we're going to do read all groups. We don't want to grant it read write because we don't want it to have more permissions than necessary. So we'll do that. And it's going to say not granted for my tenant. You would then grant admin consent. So that's it. Now we can go back. Now that we captured this information, we would go back and we would go to graph. Okay. Let's go here to graph. We're going to copy in the endpoint URL. Oh, that's the method. So we want to do a get because we're just getting some information. And we're going to copy in the endpoint. Now, instead of what you saw in the Explorer, we're going to put in the new team ID. And we're going to select the web URL property. Now, just do a couple more things here. So the tenant, copy in the tenant, tenant ID, client ID, and the client secret. Whoops, we want to say secret. We want to client secret. Again, you can this is like pretty much cookie cutter. So that step will get our site URL. Now what we need to do once we have the site URL, it'll return JSON, and we need to parse the JSON. So again, there's another step here that we have to add. We get the body of the response back, and then we want to we want to give it the properties. So again, how do I get this? I could run this one time, get the response, and then generate this. I could get the response back and formulate this property here, this JSON object. Right. So then once we're done with that, we can update the item, and we can write we'll get the web URL from the JSON. All right. So I'll save that, and I'm going to run another test. And while that's running, I will take a look. Okay. So here we go. I'm not going to put any. You know what? Last time I think I didn't put any admins, and it broke because it was expecting an admin. So let's leave that blank. Okay, great. So there's some questions coming. Under what business scenario does it benefit creating teams via Power Automate flows from directly creating teams from the admin center? So you can't. So creating teams from the admin center is fine, but this is about a provisioning process. So having users automatically fill out some information. And then this does this all on its own. So once the users fill out the information, it'll just go and create the site for them. Or you can add an approval process. So it's really about control of the whole process, right? If you want to have your admins create, I know it doesn't, maybe you only need to make one team here and there. This is not going to be worth the investment, right? But if you find the need that you're building your business requires you to create teams more often, then you would want to kind of spend some time maybe creating a process that you can control of creating the teams, like having users fill out a form where you gather information. Maybe you're going to have something more on this form that's not required to actually provision it. Like, what's the reason? Why do you need this team? And then when the admin comes in or they get the approval, so you could then in here build out steps to do an approval. So when a new team comes in, you can have it sent off for an admin to either say yes or no. And I've done that in another example. It requires a little bit more steps. So it's all about control in that. And I think that's the biggest benefit. Control, and then kind of like once it's implemented, you can reuse it. And again, creating teams, maybe you need to have teams at certain channels. Maybe you want to have teams with certain folder structures behind the scenes. That's all can be done with the Power Automate process. All right, so for one scenario, if you want to control who can't create a team yet, normally anybody can create a team by going into teams, which causes an excess of teams. So yeah, again, that's sort of the answer there. Locking down, again, anybody can create a team, right? Until you turn it off. You'd have to turn off teams, who can create teams in your organization. then implement this process. Right, that's a key component to this whole thing, because you can set this process up, but I can go into Teams and I can still create, I can still, from my Teams client, which I don't have up, I would still have the ability to create a team. So you have to turn that off. Okay, so we've created our ZA2, but it didn't run. So let's go back here. That's why sometimes it failed. Sometimes it's something very simple. Resources not found. Now I've seen this before. I must have messed something up. Must have messed something up on the graph. I'll give it one check and then we'll move on. Just make sure I got everything. So we're getting, oh, I think I left one thing out. So OAuth, authorities, empty, graph. Just make sure I have everything correctly. Sometimes it does, it did get messed up in that case. Let's try, I'll try one more. This doesn't work. I can go over to my other one that I have already created, and you'll find it's pretty quick and it does run. There it goes. Looks like it's starting to rain here. All right, so let's see what happens. Did it create it successfully? Of course it fails. Yeah, resource down. It's just sometimes when I'm doing these, it's just going to fail. All right, so let's go over to my Chicago environment, and okay, here's another one. Right, so we'll take a look at this one. This one's fully built out. We were at the end of the process. I just probably typoed something in either one of those IDs that I don't really want to dig into and waste the time there. So let's go back to my flows. We'll take a look at the one that I built out yesterday to make sure that this was all still working. Right, so the HTTP request, I probably just typoed something in there. This will still work. Again, updating the item. We're doing something in here where we're sending the information back to SharePoint. So if I look at the list on here, right, so you can see that, this one's going to open the Power App, a little preview of the Power App. And I will just kick that off. Just make sure it's alive. And we'll go into the next part about creating the Power App. So yeah, I don't want to jump into this tenant, this site, because I want to build the Power App. So I want to show you the Power App. That one already has it built. So let's go back here. Trying to watch the time. So we got 10 minutes. We'll jump into the Power App. Let me just make sure that for now, this one is running. And I'll go back to this flow because this is connected to the list, and I'll just take this one offline temporarily. Well, I'll just delete it for right now, since I messed something up there. Okay, so we'll take that down so that we can build the Power App and it will still work, but essentially it does work. Just got to make sure you type everything correctly. Not incorrectly. Incorrectly. So let's go over to our projects list and we'll move on to the Power App. Again, we don't want people to see this stuff. We don't want people to go to this list directly. So we would create a form to fill out, and you can use a Microsoft form. You can send the Microsoft form and a flow on the Microsoft form to populate this list. You could build an app to populate this list. There's a couple different ways to cut it up here. So what we're going to do is the simplest for right now, and that's going to be to create the Power App. So we're going to click Customize Form. And the reason I show this, it's even though it's very basic, there's a lot of things that go into it just to get it to work with the list item. There's a couple of steps here that we need to address. So let that load. All right, so we can see our Power App here, our custom form. Now the first thing that I do is I duplicate the screen 3 times. One for the new form, one for the view form, and one for the edit. So we'll duplicate this 3 times, and then we're going to start to do some things here. Like the first one is going to be the new form screen, and we'll just say new form, and we'll say edit form screen, edit form, and this one's going to be the view form screen, view form. Okay, so it seems like now we have 3 different forms for the 3 different ways that we can use or interact with list items. On the new form, we're going to start taking stuff off. We're going to unlock this. We don't want people to see attachments. There's no reason they need to be there, so we'll say false. We don't want them to see, and make sure it's unlocked. We don't want them to see provisioned, so we'll turn visible. I don't know why it's not doing a drop down there. I thought it did that yesterday. I guess not. False. And then also active. We're not going to let them set active when they create a new project. We're going to assume it's active. We also don't want them to see the site URL when we don't want them to type anything in there. So the users essentially would just get 3 fields here. But if we went in as an admin to edit a list item, we would then be able to see all the items here, and we can edit it. There's no point, there's no reason once it's created why we would really go in there and edit it. And then the same thing for view. So this just leaves it the list untouched. So I need to do one more thing here. So on the form, there is a section here. So form edit. This one is now form new. Just make sure that these are correct. So the form knows like what mode it's in. And then we will say this one's form view. So we don't want to completely destroy the list. Now, the other thing we need to do is this SharePoint integration piece, and we'll change these things so that they use our new fields. So, whoops. So we're going to do set the SharePoint form mode on the create form to the new form, and then we're going to navigate to this new form screen. So we're going to do that for the 3 different form types: on edit, on new, and on view. So it goes to our custom. So it'll go to these custom pages. If we left it, then you would never. Did I spell that incorrectly? Oh, just didn't do that correctly. View form screen. View form. I don't trust that that worked correctly. So what did I do? View form screen. And it's so touchy. Oh, okay. View form. And then view forms navigate to the screen. There we go. Had it backwards. All right, so those are the key pieces of information that we need to set up to get this to work. So let's go back and save it. And again, with this form, you can get as fancy as you want. I obviously don't have time to do a lot more than just set up the right field, but you can do whatever you want. You can change the colors, you can change the size. Let's go back to SharePoint, and we'll get the site set up. So we're on Chicago 1. What we're going to do is we're going to use a button to load this form. So I will edit the page, and on here I'll create a zone for, we're going to say action, call to action. So here, submit MS Teams request. And we'll edit this, put in I don't know, apply. There we go. That's good enough. And hopefully this will, yeah, that should work. All right, so then we click apply. What this is going to do is launch our Power App. And if you see in the URL at the end of the, I pretty much put the URL for the projects list with new form.aspx. And then I give it a source. So once the form's submitted, it doesn't direct them to the list. It directs them back to whatever URL is in this source. So here we'll do ZA8. And we can do, it's the same thing, we could do our admins. So again, on this form, you can put instructions on here, you know, apply this, you could build it out as much as you want. And we'll go to admin. We'll just say, oh, I have this guy, visitor 1, right? And we'll click save. So I'll fire that off and that'll go back here. Let's just do one more thing. Now we want to display a list of our forms. We can add a list to projects, and we can edit the current view to say show when active is yes, show when provisioned is equal to yes. Right, and this is just give us some. This will just clean it up. I don't know why it doesn't bring me back. Right, so it'll clean it up and it'll let you know. Now when the users go here, they can see, and you can change the way that this looks. One example, for like I said from the previous one, was I had the projects here. I had the site URLs, so if they can see all the active projects and they can go and click right into it. Right, so then most of these are dead because I cleaned them out from the tenant, from the tenant. So that was the whole point of the button, and then you can see the project. Now this one's not using the search PnP web parts that I showed in the beginning. This is just the list view filtered down by active projects, right? So you can send the user an email saying, okay, your project's now active. Let's republish this page, and it should, Z8 should have showed up, but again, I think I broke the flow, which is just great. Let's see what happens, the flow. Oh, I guess it never ran. Yes, we'll have to wait for the flow to run. It looks like the flows are kicking off a little slow today. And I took out that step, so it should still complete. All right, so while we wait for that, we're reaching the end of the session anyway. There's only 2 minutes. Are there any other questions? Just gonna wait. I'll give it this flow like another minute. And it's not as this, sometimes it's just very slow. Go to the list. Oh, did I put it in the right list? That would make sense if it's not fired up. Oh no, you know what? Yeah, I totally messed that button up. So the button actually submitted to the other site. That's why we're not seeing the flow. So here, let me just clean that up, and then so the button was actually pointing to the Chicago 1 site. So I will republish this, and there, if I apply, now this is going to actually load the right form. Yep, I still have another typo in there. Okay, so I still have a typo on my button. This is now coming up, so this one will be admin. And with this, I'll just fire this off, and then we'll wrap it up. Okay, so this is now going to the correct place. There you go. So now we're getting ZAA here. For some reason my view did not save. I guess it didn't save the filters that I had up there. So again, another problem. Yeah, the source of the form. So yeah, the URL, just for everybody to see it one more time. So that's the URL of the form. So I'm just linking to the projects list and then saying new form, right? But make sure, since I have 2 Chicago sites, I messed the first, I had left out the 1. So that was why it was actually putting it in the wrong list. Now, and then when you use the source parameter, that just redirects people, which I mentioned earlier, but it's a nice little trick when you fill out like a new form, it'll just redirect people, so you don't get, they won't go to this list. All right, so that's it in a nutshell. That's the quick and dirty provisioning process. Obviously, this is just the starting point, so you can then take this and you can expand your flow. Like I said, you can extend it with approval process. You can then have it automatically do some heavy duty lifting with PowerShell PnP. In this flow here, again, using the HTTP request, you can hit other endpoints. You can get information from other places, right? The sky's the limit here. Again, this is like the basic one. This isn't something that I would say like, okay, here, this is perfect for your, you let everybody hit it. You obviously have to put in some checking too for empty values, add some descriptions to the forms, that kind of stuff needs to be done. All right, so in closing, let's just get this slide up here. Okay, so in closing, please visit the link here below. Take a snapshot of this, leave some feedback. If you need to reach out to me, my contact information is up here. I'd be happy to connect with anybody on LinkedIn or Twitter. You can email me directly in the blog. And let me put in, if you want to follow this along, again, I'll paste into the chat window my blog site that has this already out there with the slides and another video where it goes into more detail. But I appreciate everybody coming. Thanks for the questions. If you have more questions, feel free to leave them in the chat. With that said, everybody have a great rest of your day and have a great weekend.